if ever conjured up. For decades and in movies and TV series everywhere, people have postulated whether it's truly possible to travel through time, whether to change an event in the past or to see what the future actually holds. So far, the word on the street is that time travel isn't possible, and we should all wake up from that fantasy. But the stories we're about to show you in this video just might be proof that this dream shouldn't be abandoned just yet. Let's take a look at some real-life events that could provide some validity to the belief that time travel is real. Number 10. The mysterious disappearance of Thomas Johnson. We begin our rankings with a story that seems almost like it was ripped out of the Stranger Things series, or perhaps Stranger Things took its inspiration from this story. Back in 1912, there was a little 10-year-old boy named Thomas Johnson who lived with his parents and family in New York. This was a period where industrialization was sweeping through the United States, but several parts of the country were still rural farmlands, including the part of New York where the Johnsons lived. The Johnsons lived on a sprawling farmland that had a lake nearby. No one necessarily knew how the lake was formed or what got it there, but Thomas and his friends were fond of playing around in it from time to time. The only problem here was that Thomas's father wasn't as fond of the lake as his little boy and his friends. Mr. Johnson believed that several animals had wandered too close to the lake and had never returned. And considering that young Thomas and his friends weren't even teenagers yet, it's understandable that Mr. Johnson was concerned for their safety. Well, kids are naturally rebellious, and despite his father's warnings, Thomas and his friends still snuck to the lakeside to play. However, things eventually came to a head one day when the children went to the lake and Thomas wandered a bit too close to it. According to accounts given by friends, a whirlpool suddenly formed in the lake. The curious Thomas went closer to the lake to take a look, and he got sucked into it. In a few moments, the 10-year-old boy had vanished from sight. A search was immediately assigned after Thomas's father informed the police, but the search proved futile, and everyone presumed that Thomas was gone. For years, Thomas's father was grief-stricken about his son's disappearance. He'd walk by the lake that took Thomas in hopes that he'd somehow get his son back. And one day, almost 60 years after the incident, the unexpected happened. On one of his walks by the lake, Thomas's father saw a similar swirl as described by Thomas's friends forming in the lake again. And in the most mind-blowing event, Thomas emerged from the swirl. Mr. Johnson, who was 91 years old at this time, probably thought his mind was playing tricks on him, but this was no trick. Right there, standing in front of him, was his son. After the initial excitement, however, Mr. Johnson noticed that his son was still very much young. Thomas, who was still quite disoriented, eventually gained composure and could only ask why his dad was incredibly old while he was only 15 years old. Strange, isn't it? When authorities found out what had happened, they took Thomas in and took his fingerprints. They were shocked to find that the prints matched those of the 10-year-old Thomas before he disappeared, meaning that he was indeed the same person. As for Thomas, he was pretty much in shock and unable to give a full account of what had happened in the time he was gone. Where he went to, what he was doing, or what caused him to disappear, he couldn't say. I'm pretty sure his family is beyond glad to have him back, but Thomas's disappearance and the circumstances surrounding it definitely show that time travel could be a real thing. Number 9. The John Titor phenomenon. Most stories about time travel tend to revolve around someone going to the future. However, back in the late 90s, the internet was buzzing with a story about a man who seemed to come back to the past. Between 1998 and 2001, the internet was pretty much this new frontier where everyone was free to express themselves. And as internet forums started to pick up, there was a particular channel opened by a man named John Titor. Titor claimed that he was a United States soldier from 2036 from a parallel timeline who was sent to retrieve an IBM 5100 in 1975, which he needed to debug computers back in the future. To back up his claims, he shared some interesting photos of his time machine, which he claimed had helped him to go back in time to complete his mission. Interestingly though, Titor's claims were all on the internet and nowhere else. All attempts to interview him live proved abortive as he wouldn't respond to anyone, and over time people started to believe that this guy might have been a faker. Before his channel eventually closed in March 2001, Titor shared some predictions for the future. For instance, he claimed that there would be a second American Civil War in 2004 that would escalate and run for 4 years. He also claimed that the Olympics would be cancelled after 2004 due to a global conflict. Considering that none of these events have come true, it appears that the John Titor story must have been a fad. But there are still a lot of believers out there. Perhaps our timeline had a major shift that prevented his predictions from coming to pass. We may never know. Number 8. The Mike Markham disappearance. Even though it's still a popular concept today, time travel has always been something on the minds of many people and for many years. Back in 1995, a 21-year-old electrical engineering major named Mike Markham appeared to be coming pretty close to building a time travel machine. Markham, who lived in Stanberry, Missouri, was looking to build a time machine and travel to the future so he'd see the winning lottery numbers. He worked up his first prototype, which he called the Jacob's Ladder. According to Markham, the device reduced air resistance between poles using a compact disc. The result will be a pretty impressive sight. When turned on, the Jacob's Ladder showed a continuous arc and a heat mark in the shape of a circular vortex. When Markham put a metal screw in his device, he claimed it vanished for a few seconds before reappearing a few feet away. He concluded that he needed more power to make the device work, and he decided to steal 6 old transformers from a local power grid. Markham's heist worked because he caused a massive blackout when testing his experiment. He was eventually arrested for stealing the transformers, but the assigned judge believed Markham was mentally impaired and placed in prison for just 2 months. While in prison, Markham had built quite the following, and when he was released, he was invited by the popular paranormal broadcaster Art Bell to be a guest on his coast-to-coast radio show. There, Markham told the story of his plans and the progress he had made so far, including his financial constraints and intentions to proceed to build the time machine legally. Markham's story was so inspiring that people began to call him for days and even sent donations to him. They sent money, ideas, and spare parts to him, and he was able to build a much stronger and larger prototype, one which he planned to use on himself. Within the next year, Markham made more appearances on Bell's show. He claimed to be on the cusp of delivering the time machine and even said that he'd take his cell phone with him when he traveled in time. But the time machine enthusiast suddenly disappeared in 1997 and hasn't been seen since. Strangely, after he was declared missing, someone called Bell's show to talk about a strange story he found concerning a man found dead on a beach by California police in the 1930s. According to the story, this man had been crushed to death in a strange metal tube. He was unrecognizable, and he had a mysterious device that was found close to his body, something that looked like a cell phone. Considering that cell phones weren't available back in the 1930s, there was speculation that he had traveled back in time where he died. There have been other speculations about what happened to this time travel enthusiast, although no one really knows what his fate was at the end of the day. Number 7. Edward the Time Traveler. Most people who claim to be from different times tend to have some form of proof to back up their assertions. And back in 2021, a man named Edward went viral for doing just this. Edward is a self-described time traveler who went viral after he was caught on tape claiming to be from the year 5000. The video, which was first posted on Apex TV, showed the moderately dressed Edward sitting in what was assumed to be an Armenian park as he narrated his story. Edward's face was hidden and his voice was distorted to protect his privacy, but he seemed incredibly confident that he was indeed from the future. According to the middle-aged man, he had been part of a top-secret experiment back in 2004. The experiment was to test the feasibility of time travel, and he appeared to have been a successful part of the program as he was able to travel through time thousands of years into the future. To back his claims up, Edward pulled a picture from his jacket, which he claimed was taken in the year 5000. The image appeared to show Los Angeles underwater. According to Edward, he had been working in a lab in Los Angeles when he was approached with an opportunity to go into the future and take pictures. He appeared in a perfect spot, but he noticed that all of the structures around him were made of wood. At some point, he realized that it was Los Angeles, except completely underwater. After speaking to locals, Edward found that the entire city had flooded due to global warming. Ice caps had melted and much of the world had been submerged as a result. Edward also shared some ominous predictions, including the fact that many people had evolved into beasts and that civilization as we knew it had ended by the year 5000. As expected, Edward's story has come under a lot of scrutiny. Most people believe that time travel to that extent isn't even possible and that he just photoshopped the picture in a bid to go viral. Well, I guess we'll all find out by the year 5000, right? Number 6. J. Bernard Hutton and Joachim Brandt. J. Bernard Hutton and Joachim Brandt were two German newspaper reporters who were assigned to the Hamburg-Altona shipyards in search of evidence to back up a story. The assignment was given amid the Second World War, so it's assumed that their story had something to do with military conflicts around that time. In any case, Hutton and Brandt were left pretty much disappointed as their entire journey didn't yield much in terms of result. As they moved around the shipyards, however, things soon turned on their head as bombs started to rain down on the shipyard. The two men recalled the bombs being dropped all around them and not having anywhere to go. But even amidst their terror, Hutton and Brandt were able to take a few pictures around them showing the bombs being dropped. It was a story after all. Perhaps they could use this to suffice and make up for why they came. When they were done, both men were lucky enough to get a vehicle to take them to safety. After they eventually arrived at a safe place, they decided to develop the images they had taken, and this was where things started to get freaky. Despite the numerous images they had taken, both men ended up with pictures that showed nothing unusual. They shared the story of their ordeal with an editor, but without much proof to back their claim up, the story was eventually dropped altogether and the incident was pretty much forgotten. But even weirder is the fact that 11 years later in 1943, Hutton came upon a newspaper article only to find a story about a successful air raid that had been carried out by a squad of Royal Air Force pilots on the very same shipyard on the very same day that he and Brandt had been there. Hutton claimed that the scene of the destruction was the same place he had been with Brandt. Whatever happened to both men that day remains a mystery. Perhaps they unknowingly came across a glitch in the space-time continuum. Number 5. The Disappearing Bookstore. Back in 1996, a policeman got the scare of his life in a story that can only be described as being caused by time travel. According to reports, this policeman and his wife were out on a shopping day on the streets of London. His wife had been looking to get some books, so she went into a local bookstore while the policeman decided to wait for her outside. While his wife shopped for a few titles in the bookstore, the policeman decided to check out a local CD store, and this is where things started to get weird. As the policeman explained, he started to notice a strange quietness around him when he was walking towards the CD store. He decided to stop and look around, and he noticed a van like one of those in the 1950s, a van from decades ago in 1996 London. This was pretty weird. Even stranger was the fact that he seemed to have spaced for a few seconds. When he finally came to, the 1950s van was very close to him. The van honked and went around him, and the policeman was suddenly jolted back to life. In his clearance of vision, the policeman noticed that all of the shops around him had changed. Also, he found that everyone around him seemed to be dressed in 1950s clothing. Despite his confusion, the policeman thought of locating the store where his wife was, but when he got there, he found that the bookstore had been replaced by a woman's clothing store. Desperate to find his wife, the policeman went into the clothing store, and as soon as he went inside, the clothing store literally changed back into the bookstore. He later learned that the clothing store he saw had existed back in the 1950s, only to be replaced by the bookstore. When you think about it, accidental time travel could only be the reason for this weirdness. Number 4. Noah, the Spy from 2030. Back to people who claim to have gone to the future and been back. Meet Noah, a man who claims to have come back in time. Back in 2018, Noah's story became an internet hit as this little guy gained massive followers after claiming to have been from the future. At the time, he gained massive fame after being featured on the Kyle and Jackie O Show, one of the most popular morning shows in Australia. While giving his testimony, Noah's face was distorted and his voice was changed. Nevertheless, this self-described time traveler had a lot to say. According to Noah, he had been part of a secret government operation that had engaged in multiple time jumps over the years. They were eventually sent to our time in a bid to stop a Mexican drug cartel from expanding. However, one of his team members did something wrong in the middle of their mission, resulting in the entire group being fired. Left with no way of going back home, Noah was essentially trapped in 2017. But after staying in our world for a year, Noah decided to come clean with his story. Perfect timing, wouldn't you say? But as for how he was able to seamlessly travel in time, Noah claims that he's been a time jumper since junior high. Essentially, he has implants in his body that allow him to jump in time. So he basically steps into this massive dime and is hit with electrical charges that go through him and push him through time. Noah described the time travel process as being similar to electrocution. He also claimed that he takes anti-aging pills to help him maintain the same look and age whenever he time travels. As he claimed he was 50 at the time, but the anti-aging pills help him easily blend and keep up a fake appearance. Noah went on to share some predictions about the future. He said that Yolanda Rennie King, the granddaughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., would end up being president of the United States. Noah also added that no one in the future uses cable TV or Instagram anymore, although Facebook and Snapchat are still popular. And he claimed that humans would eventually be able to communicate with alien life. So I guess we've got something to look forward to down the line. However, he did claim that Donald Trump would be re-elected, so there's a chance that his predictions are just wrong, but I guess time will tell. Number 3. Håkan Nordqvist. A lot of people who come out with claims that they had traveled in time seem to have deliberately done so. However, in the case of Håkan Nordqvist, it appears that his time travel event came in a complete happy accident. Håkan is a middle-aged Swedish man who claimed to have traveled in time. His story went viral on TikTok back in 2021, although he claimed that his time travel experience actually happened 15 years earlier in 2006. As Håkan explained, he stumbled upon what appeared to be a tear in the space-time continuum one day back in 2006 as he was trying to fix a leaky pipe under his kitchen sink. He claimed that he had gotten his tools to fix the pipe problem was so far down he couldn't reach it. So he kept reaching in until he saw a bright light and reached a point where he couldn't return and got sucked into a time vortex. When he eventually came to, Håkan claimed to have found himself in the future. He even had time to do some searching where he found the 70-year-old version of himself. And to make sure he didn't forget anything, Håkan decided to document the entire encounter on his phone. Both young and old Håkan could be seen smiling and talking to each other as they embrace and show off their similar arm tattoos. Håkan didn't bring any tales from the future or predictions about the past, so his story has pretty much been refuted by many people around the world. Still though, considering how strange our world is, would it be totally out of line to think the man was telling the truth? Number 2. Andrew Kelson. Andrew Kelson's story of time travel differs from most because he didn't go looking for fame. Instead, he was found after some improbable events that occurred relating to him, and he ended up explaining how time travel helped him to become one of the luckiest men in the world. Back in 2003, Kelson ended up on the radar of the FBI after he appeared to have turned $800 in personal fortune into $350 million in the space of 2 weeks. This was a period when stocks seemed to be going haywire, and Kelson seemed to have a perfect understanding of the market, so much so that he seemed to be the most profitable man in the history of the world. As expected, such a transformation made headlines and drew eyeballs, and soon enough, the FBI whisked Kelson away and asked him how in the heck he managed to get that done. The agency charged Kelson with insider trading, but instead of denying the allegations, he decided to confess and tell them everything that had happened. According to Kelson, he was a time traveler who had come from 250 years in the future. He expanded that he had found 126 of the most profitable high-risk trades in history, and he decided to place them. Just like that, this man turned $800 into almost $500 million in less than a month. As expected, the feds were skeptical about all this time travel mumbo-jumbo, so they jailed him and claimed that he'd rot behind bars until he gave up his source. But Kelson didn't have any sources. Instead, he offered to give them more important details in exchange for his freedom, including the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden and the cure for AIDS. It's not clear whether he gave up such information, but with the FBI so bent on proving him a liar, they dug into this guy's past. Interestingly, the FBI was unable to find any records of Kelson before December 2002, just 3 months after he was arrested on insider trading suspicions. And to make things even more interesting, Kelson mysteriously disappeared on the way to court for his bail hearing, and since then, he's never been seen again. Number 1. Greta Thunberg's strange doppelganger. If you've been on the internet for the past few years, then Greta Thunberg won't be a stranger to you. This firebrand Swedish girl rose to prominence back in 2019 when she went viral for her efforts towards climate change and environmental activism. So far, Greta has taken her no-nonsense brand of activism to new heights, talking smack to world leaders, challenging her haters on social media, and even becoming the youngest person to be named Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2019. With all she's been able to achieve, Greta seems like the ideal role model for anyone her age. However, just as she was starting to find her fame, internet sleuths found something pretty disturbing. According to reports, several online users dug up a picture of a young Klondike gold miner from back in 1898 that looks suspiciously like the environmental activist. The now viral image was found as part of a collection by Eric Hegg, a documentary photographer. It showed 3 children operating a gold mine in Canada's Yukon Territory back in the late 1800s. And as you can see, one of the children bears a striking resemblance to Greta. From her stern expression to the braids in her hair, this resemblance is just too uncanny. None of the children in the photograph are named, so it's even more difficult to determine who they are. All that is known about the image is the date and where it was taken. Still, the image captures the harsh reality many had faced at the time, as many looked frantically for gold. Internet sleuths immediately latched onto this as evidence that little Ms. Thunberg might have been a time traveler. Some claim that her time working in these mines opened her eyes to the dangers of environmental degradation, so she came to the future to warn us to get our act together. And others claim that Greta has lived hundreds of years in the future and she's come back to the past to tell us to get our act together. Whatever it is, Greta's message is the important thing here. Climate change is real and we really should get our act together. As for the prospects of this firebrand activist being a time traveler, we'll just have to leave it to chance, especially since Greta herself hasn't said anything about it. It's easy to look at many of these stories and just claim that they're mere hoaxes. However, as the world continues to get larger, it's getting more obvious that there are mysterious events that we might not know about. Who knows, maybe time travel is real. Share your thoughts in the comments section below and let us know if you have any proof to validate the speculations on time travel.